Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to The Future of Work. I'm Jonathon Noble and I'm the Managing Director of Human Engine. We are a Financial Times top-ranked management consultancy with specialisms in strategy, digital, commercial and change. We've won awards for our work in people and organisational development and performance and culture. And we're really pleased to bring you the Future of Work webinar today with a very exciting panel of guest presenters who are going to help me to talk through some of the topics associated with the future of work and what we might be expecting from that coming up. So, Mark, can I ask you to kick off?
Hi, Jonathan, and hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Brimley. I'm the Group Director for People and Corporate Services in the Government of Jersey. I see we've got some international people here, so it's not New Jersey. We're a small island in the English Channel just off the coast of France. We're an autonomous government. We're known as a Crown dependency. I have about 7,000 staff, but we have to fulfill all the functions of a nation. So everything from a government, local authorities, from prisons, police, we have our own hospital, our airport, our seaport. So we cover a whole range of services for a whole nation.
Hi everybody, my name is Sean Glee. I'm the Executive Director of People and Culture and Patient Experience at Essex Partnership University Trust. Similar to Mark, we have 7,000 employees spread across 200 sites in Essex, serving the community of Essex with both mental health and community services.
So I am a people and change consultant and a qualified coach. So in terms of, and I work for myself, for my own company, Mind & Co. In terms of background, I bring together consulting experience, coaching skills, and also some psychology training to improve people's experience of work. I do that both from an organisational perspective, so I work with organisations to create great places to work, and also as on an individual basis, so through transformational coaching, work on the sort of more individual side of thriving at work. So excited to bring sort of perspectives from lots of different organisations through that today.
So most parts of the UK are gradually coming out of lockdown now. We've had a gradual easing of restrictions in England. We're partway through that. We've got more to come later in May. Scotland's got some further easings of restrictions next week or this week, 26th of April. So we're getting a little bit into what might it look like to come out of lockdown now. And I saw for the first time this week, we responded to a request for a proposal where the client organisation said that they did want face-to-face workshops or maybe hybrid, but they certainly wanted on-site presence. Certainly that's the first time I've seen that for almost exactly a year. More than a year, actually, a year and a month. So maybe things are starting to change. Let's have a discussion about it. So Mark, I guess you've got a particular situation given where you're geographically located. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what things have been like over the last year, first of all, on the island? And then in your organisation, what are you thinking it's going to look like going forward?
Thanks, Jonathan. So I think we've been particularly privileged living in Jersey. It's a beautiful little island. I'll do my plug about being able to visit here. We've got a great visitor economy. We have financial services on the island and an agriculture industry. So with quite tight industries, it's been a real challenge for us. Unlike other organisations in large countries, part of our challenge is that we don't have the large infrastructure to call on when we need to. So we still have to run business as usual, but we did have to respond to the pandemic. I remember those very first days where I'm also responsible for business continuity, where we started to look at what we needed and what we had to stand up to respond to the pandemic. We needed an additional workforce of 400 people. Now, that was a real challenge for us, because where do we find 400 people on an island this size that aren't already in work? And that didn't affect the GDP of the island. Nonetheless, we've done that. There were lots of challenges, lots of logistics, but I think we've seen people at their very best over the past year or so. And actually, as we come out of that, there are a lot of questions and a lot of comments coming through. But I think fundamentally, we'd already started our people strategy last year. We decided that we still had to continue. We're going through a major transformation as an organisation, and we've kept our eye on that strategy. I've had a conversation with a few people in publishing about strategy, because I fundamentally think that strategies haven't changed, but the opportunities to deploy those strategies have over the past year. It's very easy for people to focus on working from home or working from anywhere, but I think that's always been the case. It's just presented us with an opportunity. And I think certainly for the government going forward, our agenda isn't necessarily about do we work from home or not, because we have front-facing services. We can't put out a fire over Zoom calls. We can't treat all of our patients over the telephone. So we still have face-to-face services. The opportunity, though, is what was coming down the line already around technology disruptors, around artificial intelligence, around reshaping what people see as valuable work, and what really works for the population today. Before I pass on, I've just come off a call with one of my team who has 3 young kids, and she says it's been really beneficial for her to work so much more flexibly. So she drops the kids off in the morning, she works from home, she gets stuff done, she picks them up again in the evening, gets through their evening routine, and then just finishes off her day. That sort of flexibility is a real interesting one, because people are saying that actually that helps out their well-being as well. They're more in control of their work, and that's a very high trust model.
Great, thanks, Mark. That great note for me to come to you, Sean. So you've got some experience of flexible work you might like to share with us, and then tell us a little bit about how that might work across the organisation more generally than just your position.
Yeah, as you can imagine, and I'm quite happy to tell everybody, I'm exec director of a Essex-based organisation, but I actually live in Barcelona, and the commuter channel has been great, enabling me to come backwards and forwards up until 6 weeks ago, where I'm now stuck in Barcelona. But it was great to hear my chief exec comment on my performance, to say it's been unaffected by not being in Essex. So it's great to see that I can do my job from a distance. But just going back to what Mark said, as an NHS trust, sort of within a week, we had to transform the business and push, I think, nearly 2,000 people out of offices back into their homes to work. So the enablement of that was unbelievable. But we still do have, nearly 5,000 people working on wards day in, day out, who look to me now to create them a level of flexibility. And that's a task that we're dealing with right here, right now. Digital enablement has been critical, not only for us, but also for the customers, for our service users. And it's an ongoing thing. It's a discussion that we have. One thing that I will say is that the most important thing to us right here, right now, is listening to our staff and listening to our customers, because what we have to create now, coming out of the pandemic, only they can tell us what to do. So that voice of the employee and voice of the customer need to meet somewhere in the middle, and will be the enabler to deliver what they want.
Great. We started working with you almost at the exact point that lockdown happened. So I thought, oh crumbs, it's game over here. That job's not gonna happen. But yeah, as you say, as so many organisations did, I think we all had that mild panic about, well, how is this possibly going to work? Whether you are a large public sector organisation like a hospital trust, or in Mark's case, a government for an entire nation, or a small business, we all thought, well, how is this possibly going to work? Whether you're trying to mobilise 7,000 people working from home, or you're a small business and you're thinking, well, there's no way my customers are going to want to continue with this project given everything else going on. So the mobilisation of that, and the way that the continuity plan was activated was really remarkable. And I think it certainly, in my mind, it turned the business continuity plan from something that you did to tick off an audit requirement and then saved on the shared folder till it was updated the next year, into, oh, here's actually a practical manual that's going to get us out of this sticky situation, or at least let us keep our heads above water. Sean?
I don't know how my colleagues feel about this, but I feel like we've just been through something that the younger generation, so the Gen Z, the millennials, they cope with it. It was us that were used to going to offices that had to adapt. So we talk a lot about goodwill of our people. It's what they wanted. and actually getting that really nice mix now of enabling people to have hubs and centres that they can go to work in if they want to, but keeping that mentality of actually you're now a digital employee, you can work anywhere you want at any time, is still going to be the challenge for us. And that's just coping with the modernisation of the thought of actually, I can now provide round-the-clock services anywhere in the world with the same people. I do feel like there's a little bit about actually we were ready for this because the younger generation were telling us this is what we want, this is how we want to work.
So different industries have had different reactions to that. So what I've picked out the most contrasting views that I could possibly find on what the new normal is going to be to throw that for discussion in a minute. But let me just bring Heather in first of all then. So Heather, from your point of view, also a small business in the consulting industry, did you have that moment of fright that I described when things went into lockdown, and how have things been for you over the last year?
Yeah, I guess, as the conversation was going, I was thinking of, I feel almost like I've got 3 very different lenses on this. So first individually, so a very small business, it's just me. I'm effectively a freelancer. Definitely had the oh crumbs moment. Definitely saw some of my freelance colleagues who have been freelance for several years run their own business successfully, take permanent roles quite quickly. And that kind of, from a freelance perspective and thinking of the gig economy, came off the back of worries around IR35 as well. So I think there was already sort of people feeling unsettled around that. For me personally, I've been incredibly fortunate that I've had a very busy pandemic, too busy at times. So I haven't had that sort of complete lack of work that I thought might happen, and that some of my colleagues were worried about. I suppose an example of that, I suppose, and one of the lenses I've had in terms of how clients have responded. So I did a contract before Christmas last year with a consulting firm that I used to work for. And the client was based in Scotland, and we did it fully remotely. And previously, when I'd worked for that firm, I'm really confident we would have been commuting up, staying in hotels. That was a big part of my role when I was in a firm. So very different way of working, and actually fully trusted to be able to deliver that project remotely, which may well not have happened before. So that trust piece that was mentioned really resonates. But interesting, I suppose, I've also got that coaching lens. So working with individuals one-on-one who between them work for a huge number of different organizations, and seeing the different responses of different companies on an individual basis to that. And that word trust definitely comes up for me again. Some people are talking to me about really high trust culture. They've collectively proved that sort of presenteeism is a thing of the past. You don't need to be physically in the office to do things. Others have kind of told me about very different attitudes. So almost thank God now we can all go back to the office, from sort of senior management. Some managers and leaders not necessarily knowing how to lead in a remote environment, and that being a real barrier. So a sort of pressure to come back into the office. So I guess that consulting answer in a way of like, it depends, because I've seen so much variation over the last year with different organizations.
Yeah, but I think that that is reflective of the world at large. If I pick out a couple of recent examples, so within the last week, we've had HSBC come out and say they're gonna scrap the executive suite. I'm very jealous of people who work in organizations that have executive suites. Having spent the majority of my career in the public sector, I can kind of tell you, even as a director, the executive suite ain't up to all that much. But they're going to get rid of that in their UK office, their London office in Canary Wharf, and replace that with collaboration space. So that's their assumption. When people are coming into the office, they're collaborating. So I guess if you're doing things that are slightly more practical than a meeting like this, and it really would be helpful to be there face to face, that's their plan. There's going to be more space available to do those sorts of things. Then by contrast, we've got the chief exec of Goldman Sachs, who've also been in the press for different reasons, saying remote working is not the new normal. It's an aberration, and one that we're going to correct as soon as possible. So there's two perspectives from two very big businesses. I couldn't be further apart. Mark, which side do you come down on?
So it's been fascinating for me because obviously as an organisation we're incredibly diverse. I've seen, and a lot of it comes down to behaviour, culture. So what I've seen is as we were easing our lockdown, so I've been in the office throughout. We had a control centre, a command centre, because it wasn't just about providing health services. We still had to keep schools open. We still had to run the sewage work. We had to keep fire service going. We even set up our own Nightingale, a huge centre park. But as we've started to ease the lockdown, we're a few weeks ahead of where the UK is, certainly a few months ahead of Europe. We started to say to people that if necessary, you could come back into work. And just as we've heard, there were some managers who were immediately, I want my team around me. I want to see them. I've heard all sorts of excuses on why people had to be in the office. One of them was, well, we have to collaborate with each other, which means looking over each other's shoulders at the screen. So what have you been doing for the past 18 months? And then there's been other people who've just gone, I really love the fact that my team are all dispersed. Because when we get together for a purpose. And that collaboration is really important. So I'm already planning the floor that I have in the government HQ is rather than putting more desks in, because I've grown my team, we're taking them out and creating collaboration spaces. Because really, I only want to see people in the office when they're coming together for a purpose. And I think that collaboration is going to be really important. But in order to achieve that, there has to be a fundamental shift in perception of what line management is. A lot of organisations have already been through this. I think public sector still is quite hierarchical, partly because of the way it structures its pay. So the higher up you are, the more pay you get. That's your hierarchy. The hierarchy is being flipped, which is everyone's had to take responsibility for themselves. And I think it's a real positive. But then that changes the nature of the relationship with the manager. The manager isn't necessarily there to do what they think they're doing. They are there now to care about their team, to motivate their team. When we were in lockdown, I asked people to cancel their one-to-ones and just put in welfare, and they've gone down incredibly well, and that has motivated and energized the department in a way I wasn't expecting. But we were slightly late to that, so I think behaviours are important. Management skill, redefining the role of the manager, the coaching style is really important, but also the expectation, that employee voice. You can't go back to where you were before, but you can't make assumptions about where you're going to go. That employee voice, that evidence, that co-design for the future is going to be absolutely critical.
Heather, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, just I really agree with that, because I think some of the work I do with clients is around employee experience, and a lot of the time, I hear clients say, "Oh, but I don't know what people feel about going back to the office. I don't know what people want from hybrid work. I don't know what." And I was sort of like, "Well, have you asked them?" And I'm like, "Oh no," because actually it feels like a difficult or confronting conversation to have. And I do think some of the themes I think I've seen from the various experiences throughout COVID is diversity, such huge diversity in people's experiences. I'm more on the introverted side. At first, I really loved having I've got space. We turned this room into somewhere with a desk. I was really fortunate. I have friends who are extreme extroverts, and it drove them mad not having people around them all the time. So it's just, such diversity in terms of what people need, whether you've got family, what other responsibilities you've got, mental health challenges, there's all sorts of things. And I think when we go back into, I was going to say back into the office, but let's say as we sort of formalize what the future looks like, it will look so different for different people, and it needs to. And the only way that we can get that working well is employee voice. What do people actually need, and what are the challenges of making that kind of work together? The hybrid way of working is going to have its challenges. Just things like talked before about, do you have core working hours so that you and your partners are online at the same time? How do you manage that? How do you allow flexibility with enough structure to facilitate it? And so that's where the second theme for me is just like learning. I think it's really important. It sounds a bit sort of, but going into this with a learning mindset, we haven't actually done this before. A lot of these trends were in place, they were bubbling away, but we haven't had this type of challenge before, and we haven't had this future before. So actually going in with a learning mindset, being prepared to say, we're going to try this, get the employee voice in there and hear how it works and review as we go. I think that's just going to be really critical as we go forward.
So I was reading the Forbes top 7 predictions or trends for how work's going to change in preparation for this. Number 1 is that they want to rebrand employee experience, Heather. So interested to get your take on this as someone who does a lot of work in this area. So employee experience is out, apparently, no more EX. We're now talking about human experience. And the idea behind that is that there's a perception that employee experience has been a bit two-dimensional. It's kind of focused on the relationship between an employer and an employee. And the human experience is, well, let's think more holistically about well-being. So I suppose the question is, Mark's raised the point that not all managers might be comfortable with that, or equipped or experienced or trained to have those conversations about well-being. So I suppose here's a question. If that's going to become more of the role of managers going forward, how well equipped do you feel people are to do that? And secondly, are there any limits? So as people are doing more stuff at home and managers are looking more at their home environment and their physical and mental and social well-being, is there a limit to how far employers should encroach on people's private lives in the interest of exercising a duty of care?
Should I give some thoughts on that first?
Yeah, please do.
So the rebrand, that's again something that's been bubbling for a while. Part of me wants to eye roll a little bit, because I think there is that tendency to just look for the new buzzword and look like we know better and we're next level. So I do think I've got a bit of skepticism around it, but I think the principle is a good one. I think EX in itself was problematic because a lot of people read it as employee engagement, and it's not the same thing. So I'm definitely not against a rebrand, but I do think if you get your EX great first, and then yes, look at HX, because actually we need to think about, it's not just about the relationship, it's about how basically can we help people thrive at work. That's what we want to happen. We want people to be able to do their best work. So like that's what we're aiming for. And that is treating them as a whole human, looking at all the different needs. So on board with that generally, but I suppose in terms of how well equipped, again, varies massively. But my gut feel is like not very. I don't think your average line manager in your average organization, whatever that average looks like, is actually very well equipped for this kind of thing. I don't think they were very well equipped pre-COVID when this kind of conversation wasn't there yet. I think, relationship with line manager is one of the number one reasons people leave their role. It comes up time and time again. Quality of line management, and we've talked about the coaching management style being like we were already on a journey that badly needed to be gone on. I don't think we're particularly well equipped, but I think we can be. I think there are, if you look externally, there's great thought leadership around this. It's much more in sort of, as a society, it's much more in conversation, what this might look like. So I think we can do it, but I don't think we're well equipped to start with. Are there any limits? It's almost a philosophical debate from my perspective. I personally, my point of view is I do think there's quite a duty of care that others might argue doesn't exist for an employer. They don't have that responsibility. But I do think it was interesting the word you use, encroaching there. I think there is a risk that, so for example, I remember many years ago, someone saying to me, I don't like the phrase work-life balance, it should be life balance, which I get, but I actually felt a bit weirdly encroached on. I was like, oh, get off the rest of my life. You already take like half of my work, like my waking hours. And I felt a bit resistant about it like many years ago. So I do think, again, there probably are limits, but I think you establish them by listening to people, having the conversation and seeing what works and what doesn't.
If I could add to that, I think on the rebrand of employee experience, it's fascinating because a lot of us in the public sector probably still have people referring to as personnel. And
personnel administration in my business, Mark.
Yeah. Let's get over the last couple of rebrands first. I think it's back down to first principles though, because it doesn't matter what you call it. It's what you're trying to achieve. And this notion of management has for some decades been changing. If you there's a Professor Rupert Grint who talks about the railway, development of the railway manual, and he pulls out a tiny little red book. I mean, it is literally a tiny little red book, and he says that's from the 1940s. And then you look at it now, and it is this compendium of rules, requirements, and whatever. And also that's about learning and safety. But you start off with a very basic concept, and it grows. The concept of management, though, has been changing for decades. And I think we are going to go through another iteration of what is a manager for. In fact, do we even need managers? And I don't say that to be hugely provocative, because I think there will always be a role for some sort of leadership and management. But actually, do you need that hierarchy? Organizations who are innovative don't have those structures. They have very clear responsibilities, very clear accountability. In services such as health services, patient safety is a primacy. How does patient safety work without those hierarchies, without those management? And it comes down to value, behavior, your own personal accountability. And I think as we go forward, collaboration doesn't need managers. It needs people who understand behaviors, who need to understand roles and responsibilities. And actually, I would expect to see fewer managers, less hierarchy, and organizations that are much more dispersed. And I think I've seen in the chat where people say, we bring people together not for the core business anymore, but to collaborate, to innovate. And the pace at which technology is moving, these definitions of roles aren't going to hang around for long. So do we waste our effort defining a role? Do we waste our effort with role profiles? Or do we start to talk about your purpose and your contribution to the organization? And that then changes the role of the manager from a hierarchical one to almost like a team coach, the way that you run your sprints and agile. These people are not necessarily there to focus on day to day. They're there to move an organization, move a project on. And I think over the coming years, the future of management is at threat.
Sean, can I take this opportunity to bring you in? Because Mark's mentioned a couple of things. One of them was patient safety in a healthcare setting. And so we've worked with you to develop a strategy, which is the slogan for which is safety is everyone's business and everyone's responsibility. And we've tried to create a culture which is everybody knows instinctively what to do to ensure safe, good quality care and doesn't have to be told to do it. They're empowered to do it. But alongside that, you've been working on your accountability framework, which is a sort of real attempt to devolve the maximum feasible autonomy and empowerment to the front line. Picking up on what Mark said about, well, the role of managers is going to change and be less directive and more supportive. So tell us a bit about your views on that.
Yeah, exactly. And the board have challenged me, and their question is, how am I going to create an environment for our colleagues that enhances their home life? So big ask, big question, and it's something we're doing some work on. And actually, Jonathon, it's probably something that you and I need to talk further about another time. But I count myself as quite privileged in my role, just to be able to go and create. And something that we launched just prior to the pandemic was Be You, and we were starting to embrace everybody as an individual. And I think that's paid huge dividends, because there is absolutely no one size fits all anymore. So we're trying now to look at each individual. That's difficult with 7,000, but by telling them that they have a license to be themselves, and to tell us what they need to make their experience at work. And actually, is it experience at work? It's actually just, what helps me do a brilliant job so that I go home happy. That's where I want to get to. So that I come in, everything that I do with pleasure. It's no longer a grind. And I go home and actually I'm delighted to be home. What do I get then? I get a fantastic service, and actually safety becomes a thing of the past because I do it automatically. It's no longer a transaction. You can imagine a lot of people join the NHS with a passion. Sometimes that passion goes because it becomes transaction. and you have to do. And that's where you have the potential for safety issues. So you drive that passion and enjoyment back into the individual, and it is driving it back in just by giving license for them to do what they feel is appropriate within a parameter, but allowing them to be themselves, turning up for work and saying, I've had a crap morning with the kids, is okay. We're there to support. I think that's one thing that I'm struggling with at the moment is how do I enable more of it?
So I agree with all of that as vehemently as I possibly can. Our mantra as an organization, our purpose, if you like, is to help people and organizations to do the best work of their lives. And that was because I set the business from the point of leaving an organization that was not helping me to do the best work of my life. It wasn't a great place to be. But I think we probably need to have a discussion about what investment and interventions employers will need to make to allow that to happen in the future. So my perception is that traditionally, when we've talked about investment in health and well-being at work, it's been mainly thinking about the physical environment. So, do people have the right furniture and the chair? Have you had your DSE set up? Is it a nice environment? Have we got the vision and the values? Like organizations have said, well, we're going to book our back room on a Friday morning for baby yoga or knitting or whatever it is, but it's all being sort of co-located in the physical environment. So how might that need to change, and how might the investment and interventions need to shift to support thinking about that in a remote context? Heather?
I just, quickly, I had a thought straight off the bat, which was, it was when you mentioned baby yoga, I was triggered because there was some conversation in the coaching community that I work with around employers dealing with the sort of challenge to mental health and well-being that comes through work with giving coaching sessions or giving yoga sessions or here's a mindfulness course, rather than dealing with the root causes. And I think it's a really interesting point. I think my personal perspective is do take a multi-pronged approach, because actually sometimes someone what they need is a bit of yoga in their diary that they are committed to show up to with a colleague, and they go. It's a great prompt to help people look after themselves. But other times it is actually investing in what are the structures, cultural elements, managerial behaviors, etc., that drive some of the pressure that people are feeling. And again, some of that is not new, and I think we'd be doing people a disservice if we said it was to do with COVID only. So I would love to see some investment looking again at listening to people all through organizations, what's the experience, but things going back to basics in some ways, in some situations, like workload. How are decisions made? What are even just things like inefficient processes stressing people out? Unnecessary workload is a lot more stressful than necessary workload of the same volume. Like there's studies that show that. So just actually doing some really healthy basic things and investing in that, I think, is really key. That was my initial thought off the bat.
I tend to agree. HR. So I'm not.
Mark, you're breaking up a little bit, so I'm not sure we're getting all of your pearls.
Oh, sorry. I'm not an HR. I'm not an HR person by background. I actually came in to bring the profession down from within, because I was a line manager and I was very frustrated. And actually, we can overcomplicate it. I always say that a lot of the departments that I've gone into, I used to be an interim or take control. They were bogged down by stuff. They were doing stuff, whether it is saying, let's do yoga, let's do this. And it wasn't connected to organization purpose or organization value. And that's really important, because the economy will do some interesting things over the coming years. And you will have to prioritize what is important, what is valuable. At the very heart of what we do, whether it's public sector or private sector, we must be sustainable, growing organizations. We can't put things in that aren't sustainable or low value. There's a point in the chat around what is this rush to move to collaboration spaces. And I actually think, but from my point of view, the rush isn't necessarily because everyone wants to collaborate. This is it, it's a good idea. It's actually intended to disrupt, to prevent going backwards. So from my point of view, that rush is to disrupt. But there are other disruptors that we need to take a much longer term view on. So technology, video conferencing technology in the past year has moved on phenomenally. And that pace of change is not going to slow down, because each of the different platforms want to do much more around innovation, collaboration, work from anywhere. Teams don't need to be co-located. We don't even need people just to be on the island to deliver services. But you've also got other technological changes like AI, machine learning. You've got a new profession coming through in data science, giving you informed decisions. Behavioral science is coming to the fore over organizational development and over psychology. So all of these disruptions, before we start thinking about the future of work, we've got to think about the potential disruptions, because they're going to come faster and quicker. And you're not going to be able to sit down and write another strategy. You're going to have to adapt and change. And I think it still comes back to the what are people ready for? How do you make them more resilient to this change? And that empowerment, that trust, that voice comes out each opportunity, because we all know good change management involves people early on. It allows them to understand that change is going to get faster. It will continue to disrupt. There'll be other things, not just pandemics. There'll be other things that disrupt what we do. Travel industry is disrupted. Hospitality is disrupted. How we meet. Now, I made a joke to a consultancy the other day. I expect their fees to come down. We're no longer going out for drinks as often. Those things are disruptors. But when you think about the future of work, it's not just how do you recover from the pandemic and what's the opportunity, but there are things coming down the line that are unstoppable, that you have to then think fundamentally, what does that do to the structure of work, the structure of the organization, our product, our purpose, our culture? All of those things have to come to the mix before you take a decision about, is the collaboration space right? Do we offer base yoga?
Picking up on the consultancy thing, I've not heard it put like that, but obviously what we've heard a lot about is remote working going to affect people's pay if their salary is being based on living in a certain area or whatever. And Facebook came out quite early on and said, yes, people who are working remotely can expect to face what they call a cost of living adjustment as a result of not having to live and work in, say, the San Francisco Bay Area or an expensive part of the world. That was highly controversial, and I kind of thought a bit like the European Super Leagues lasted all of about 6 days. I kind of thought that was going to be rowed back on pretty quickly, but actually as recently as this month, they've come back out and said, nope, that pretty much is still the position. We're going to look at all the pay scales in terms of working location, because people are being paid a premium for that. There was also a study by Citrix earlier on this year where 75% of people, and this was UK based, said that they would be willing to take a pay cut in order to have wholly or majority home-based working going forward. We posted that survey and asked our own poll on LinkedIn, and it was pretty controversial. Most people who responded to ours were pretty incensed by that, and the argument was, well, no, because my value doesn't change based on where I work in the country. By the same token, I was involved in a lot of recruitment last year during lockdown, as I know Mark and Sean were. And I heard a lot of arguments from people, not arguments, that's a horrible way of putting it, but the negotiation was still there. And the case that was being made on pay was often, well, I'd need to relocate for this, or I'm going to have to travel, and that's going to cost me more in both time and money. So people were still trying to negotiate their package based on the location. What do we think this is going to turn out to be when it settles down?
Jonathan, can I just take us back for a second? Because I think
yes,
something that is super, super important. And Heather, you spoke about getting the basics. Doesn't anyone just want to be able to do the basics brilliantly so everything else just is easy? And I think that's the foundation now. We've all got to look at what we're doing. Are we doing the basics to an outstanding level? Because they're the foundation of anything that we want to build on. And that's what our employees want, and that is what great experience is, that we're doing the core fundamental basics to a beyond brilliant standard. And I think that will lift everybody, because we all know that there are processes, policies, procedures that slow everything down. We don't, they're there for a reason, but at the end of that, there's a person, whether it's a customer or a colleague. And if we nail that and do the unbelievable brilliance in our basics, we've nailed it, because we can do anything from there.
And Sean, I think that was the point I was getting at about value. We create very complex environments for our colleagues. We give them so much choice. We think that they want that choice, and it does come back down to the very fundamentals of, do they feel value in themselves? Are they motivated? And do we make it easy for them? And actually, sometimes making things easier for people is taking away that complexity. I took the opportunity during the lockdown to fundamentally overhaul our policy framework. Boy, does public service, public sector like policy. We had over 55 management policies. We've just taken it down to 5 principles. And it is that simple. Deploying that is going to be different because people are going to feel unsafe in that. But even by saying to them, you will feel unsafe with this new approach, is a basic of saying it's fine to feel unsafe. Jack B has a lot to offer.
We're just about at time for the first half of the session. Heather, did you have something that you wanted to come in with? And we'll close on there and hand over to Claire for the movement break.
Yeah, it was around the question around location-based pay, and it actually does build, Sean, on your point around the basics thing. My first question was like, if you have a stance that it's fairer to take away any sort of location-based benefit, you're making the assumption that it was fair to begin with. I think that's really arguable. What does it cost to live in a certain location? I don't know. And I think the question of, I had a coaching client who said, oh, I'm going to offer to take a pay cut so that I can keep working from home. And we ended up having a conversation around, had their value changed? What value were they providing before and after? And actually, what does that mean for the company? And I think it's a really valuable discussion to have. I think it's a bizarre issue, and I think we shouldn't assume it was fair to begin with. I think that's probably where I'd start, is actually reviewing the whole thing.
Cool. All right, that's a big project for someone. I'll leave that one with you. So we picked up quite a few questions from the chat, so I'm going to try and pick some of those up now. If you do want to chip in with something, still plenty of time, so feel free to do that. A couple of things that I've picked up, which somewhat related. So someone's made an observation that one of the things that has been more difficult in a remote environment, I guess, especially for new starters, but maybe not exclusively, this could apply to people who are working on a project, say, is the learning by osmosis piece. So I guess formal inductions, relatively easy to do online. You spend some time going through slides, you do them on screen share, you've got an opportunity for Q&A, and there's that part of it done. How many of us, when we start a new role, remember the stuff from the corporate induction 2 weeks later? I don't know. And how much most corporate inductions tell you the things that you really need to know about how to get things done in a certain job or a certain organization? Not sure about that either. So I guess I've heard this described in different ways. Learning by osmosis, the person in the chat's called it. I've heard water cooler conversations, the social aspect of work, that sort of thing. There's a process that we do with teams, which is called employee-led change. And so in that process, rather than do what consultants typically do, which is to come in and say, well, this is the answer to your problem, and I know it must be because I just did it in this other organization over the hill, so it must be exactly the same thing. We get teams to define the problems for themselves, and we've got tools and an approach and a methodology that does that and helps them to define their own problem, and then things that help them come up with solutions that they might not ordinarily feel empowered to do. And there's an interesting thing that happens, which is that teams often go from being very visibly disempowered in organizations, which is why we've picked them. We don't pick the ones where everything's high performing and you're just tweaking a few things to make it truly exceptional. We pick the ones who are pretty pissed off as not having great basics, like we were talking about before, and that's really getting on top of them in their day-to-day work. They go from being visibly disempowered to visibly empowered and energized, and other teams notice and they say, we want a piece of that. Being completely frank, we get a lot of repeat business that way because other teams spot the positive effect that it's had on their colleagues and think we want to do that. But where they tend to see that is looking through the window into the meeting room where all the post-it notes are stuck up and the workshop activities happening. And that doesn't happen so much anymore. So learning by osmosis and collaboration, what do we think might have to change in the future to reinforce some of the things that have been trickier? Heather.
So this might be a bit of a basic answer, but I've seen this quite a lot I've done a couple of ways of working projects during the pandemic, and it's come up a lot. I think my first thought around it is actually there are some really simple things that we can do, and actually possibly we're focusing on the problem and the difficulty and the barriers in place rather than kind of getting into more of a creative mindset of what could work, what would we do if we really engage problem solving around this. And I don't mean that in any sort of patronizing sense, but just for example, I was working side by side with someone on a project during the pandemic, and I basically had to sort of do a big, like the knowledge sharing right at the start, bring them up to speed, explain what I needed them to do, etc., etc. And then I thought, well, if we were together in the same room, she would be able to sit next to me and go, oh, I've just come across this. I've done that. Is that right? And just do that. I was really relaxed, informal sense checking. So I was like, well, there's nothing actually stopping me sitting on Zoom with her and set the expectation. We're not having a video call. It's as though we're sitting next to each other at partnering desks. You can chip in whenever you want. And we just did it like that. And it worked so well because we found a way of doing what we would have done if we were in the office. And it's such a simple thing. But I do think there are some basics we could do in different ways, and we just need to reset expectations of how we use technology. That's not to say it's going to cure it and make it exactly as it was, but I think getting imaginative over quick wins would be a good start.
Cool. Sean?
It's a mindset shift, isn't it? It's really, really, it's a really simple fix. And it's just that enabler. Yes, you can do whatever you want. Just allowing people, giving that permission to make the decision, to do that change. You spoke earlier, Jonathan, about what we're doing at the moment. It is all about enabling people to just get on and do. And it's a big shift. It's a really, really hard thing to do, to people, to let people know you're enabled, go and do. And I love that analogy of just, this isn't a meeting, this is just us sat 3,000 miles apart maybe, but we might as well be in the same room. And sometimes it's a shift in helping people understand that their personality, they can do that. You can do it. Enthuse them. That's all you need to do.
I know a lot of small businesses that do that or did that as a matter of course during the pandemic. So I'm thinking about environments that rely heavily on collaboration. So recruitment is a good example, actually. So a lot of people, a lot of leaders of recruitment businesses have been afraid that they've lost both the collaborative environment and the competitive dynamic and pressure a little bit of the type of environment that you get in recruitment. So I know firms where I've phoned someone up and the entire team has been in the background there on a Teams call, which I found out about afterwards, but luckily I didn't say anything that I wouldn't have said to everyone. But that's how they've set it up. So they come in, they log in every day and they sit down at their virtual desk and all of their colleagues are on the team in the background. Here's the other thing that I've been thinking about in terms of getting back into the office. So for a long time, people were obsessed with co-location, and especially whenever you changed your operating model, your org structure in an organization, and you did something like, we're going to take all of the admin people out of the departments and create a corporate business support function or something like that. The thing that people were obsessed with is, well, can they still be physically co-located? That was always the thing you could do to placate where the lines and boxes were on the org chart. But that isn't going to cut it anymore, because you've got to make sure that you're co-located, not just in space, but in time as well. It's kind of irrelevant if you agree to be physically co-located if nobody's there on the same day, because you're moving at 60% occupancy and people don't coordinate it. So there's this idea, I'm going to try and coin this phrase before anyone comes up with a better one, of not just co-locating, but contemporating, and how much work is going to have to be involved in making sure that people are not just in the same physical space, but there at the same time. And whose job is that? Is that, do you need a policy about that? Is that a manager's responsibility? Is that something employees sort out between themselves?
I just offer a quick thought on that?
Yeah, you answered my question.
I might do. I don't know where I'll go yet. I think it's a great point around timing as well. But again, I do wonder if there are simple things that already exist that we could use a bit differently. So, for example, like argument, do you definitely need to be there at the same time in order to collaborate on this? And sometimes, yes, you just need to have like a two-way or more conversation around something. Other times could you send someone a voice note with your thoughts on something? What is the barrier? Is it that you're trying to get something into written form and it's really complicated and you don't know where your ideas are going to go? Whatever it might be. But again, kind of looking at what are quick wins around it and what are some of the norms that currently get in the way. So like I've had someone say to me around, when I was in the office, I would be able to go over to someone and go, hey, have you got a minute? I just want to ask you about this quick thing. Now I have to schedule a meeting. I really get that, really resonate with that concept. But actually, I also know others that will just drop someone a message on Teams or whatever their corporate sort of messaging system is. And the norm is to say, hey, I just need 5 minutes when you've got a mo. And then they'll just call each other straight on Teams or Zoom or whatever it is. And that to them is the equivalent of going over in the office. And just again, like starting with some of the basics and just looking at what are the barriers and which ones are real. We are physically not in the same location, and that might introduce barriers, but others are more around just cultural norms, what feels naturally comfortable, what expectations are.
Totally agree with you there, Heather. I am very much walk around the corner and have that quick conversation. I have very, very quickly learned that if I'm in a meeting and I need information from somebody else, I just bring them into the meeting. My team are getting really used to me interrupting their day, which I'd knock on their office doors or walk to their area and ask them the question anyway. But I just bring them into the meeting. It's the same as going to their office. And you quickly invite them in, ask the question, thank you very much, done. I'm not sure we all need to schedule time to be in the same place at once, because that feels a bit like we're bringing back in process and policy, keeping it as fluid as possible, knowing that you could get called on at any time. And if you can't answer, you can't answer. It's like being in a meeting in your office. But if you're available, yeah, hey, I'm here. What do you need?
And I suppose to make it successful, you almost need to be able to have some availability in people's diaries, going back to the sort of the basics pre-pandemic of actually what's workload like, are meetings effective and efficient, are they serving a purpose, and looking at what are people's thinking time space in their diary, because that is going back to your original question, Jonathan, around how do we almost coordinate all of these things. I think again, this stuff works when people actually have some free time. If they're going from 8 till 8 with back-to-back meetings, it falls apart, but so do a load of other things.
Thinking time and walking time. And actually don't be afraid to walk down the road or round the block whilst you're on the phone in a meeting. It's fine.
So a lot of what we're talking about is enabled by relationships, and organizations are made up of people and relationships. And relationships don't just form through having transactions. They don't form even by having a common purpose, because that common purpose may be understood, but is it explored? So I think to your initial point, you talked about, Jonathan, talked about induction programs, those tiresome things. I've been into organizations where the induction program, there's one of the first things is, here's the HR policy, read them. You need to know how to make agreements. So, welcome to the organization. We're a complaining organization. But actually what we don't do is listen to relationships. Do we take time to listen to where people are? There is something about people working from home that is also intrusive. And I had a conversation with a colleague of mine who said, I really enjoy working from home, but I had a dispute, a confronting conversation with someone. And I suddenly felt that negative behavior, that negative conversation impinged on my home, and it made me anxious at home. And that was a really important conversation, not just about the positive, but some of the drawbacks. How do we form those relationships for people to say, actually, this isn't good? And then I think the point around teamwork, teams will come together when the relationship works. They're clear about their purpose. This is all really good basic performance management. are you clear about your purpose? What is your contribution? What story do you tell? And I was on a session this morning with managers where we are teaching them storytelling. It's not because it's a fad, but actually I want them to be able to explain in a more narrative way what they're trying to achieve, rather than setting a target. So we're doing this, we have to achieve that. We're now saying, what does this look like in the future? How do we expect to get there? We all think and collaborate that way. And I think that's becoming really powerful. And managers are talking about that storytelling. And through the storytelling, you get to know the type of person they are.
So the purpose thing for me is really, really key. We were talking before about some examples of specific employee engagement, health and well-being interventions that you could make. I've worked in organizations where they've made a genuine good stab at doing those things, and I'm a bit of a cynical old goat, so I'll always skip the 15-minute Friday morning mindfulness session or whatever it is. Other people, I have to add, come out raving about that, best thing ever, start my day off great, really strongly encourage you to do it. I guess they're probably just a bit more open-minded than me. But for me, the single most important thing that contributes to my happiness and success at work is having a clear understanding of the purpose and the strategy and knowing where I fit into that. And if I don't know where the organization's headed and what the plan is for getting there, I really, really struggle, no matter how many bells and whistles you hang around the employee experience. And I guess ultimately that's why I had to set up my own organization, so that my not so inner control freak can shepherd that bit in the direction that I wanted to go in. But again, on the Forbes 7 trends for the way work's going to change in the future, it had something that really surprised me at number 4, which is that they're predicting a shift from employee monitoring to performance monitoring. I was kind of thinking we were already there. I thought we'd got over employee monitoring, if that means inputs and widgets. And I thought we were all at performance monitoring, and now we were trying to get towards outcomes monitoring and working out what that would look like and how it aligns to purpose. But I don't know, maybe we're not as far ahead as I thought. Heather, cheer me up.
I can unmute now. Sorry, it just stopped me for a second there. Yeah, I'm probably not going to cheer you up, sorry. Because I think when we were talking about sort of where organisations are, I think we're already at such a diverse starting point. I do think there is still that monitoring going on. So I think we can almost, our perception, I think, can get a bit skewed when we're, particularly I think as consultants, sometimes looking at thought leadership, we're thinking ahead, what's the next level of change, what's coming? And as we're doing in this conversation, but actually the starting point for some organizations and their employees is pretty dire. So I do think there's a huge range.
I'll cheer you up a little bit, Jonathan. Yes. So the conversation that we're having in the government Jersey at the moment is moving away from talking about the performance and starting to talk about contribution. Particularly in public service, it's very difficult to have those targets. We are awash with KPIs. We know what we've got to contribute, but we start talking about what is your contribution, and we've defined it at 5 levels. The first is, what is your contribution to yourself? So if you keep yourself healthy, present, you develop yourself, you take ownership. Then what's your contribution to your team? So are you a team player? Are you contributing to the well-being of your team? So if someone's not in the office, picking things up for them, do you have the right behaviours? Do you prepare for meetings? You then have what's your contribution to your service? Then what's your contribution to the organisation? Do you participate? Do you engage? Do you lead engagement sessions? Are you part of the network? Are you joining up to organisation purpose? And then the 5th one we've done is, what is your contribution to the island? So what do you do outside of work that really enriches the island? Those 5 levels of contribution are all discretionary. So you can choose whether you contribute, but our assessment and our view of performance is based on your level of engagement. Your level of engagement is what difference you make by being.
I think that's a great way to to make sense of the complexity and the plurality that, as you say, comes with the public sector. So things are getting more complicated for private sector organizations. There's no doubt about that. Millennials coming into the workforce expect their organization to have views on social issues, environmental issues, and to play more of a role in the world as opposed to just a role in their market. That's really clear from all the studies that have been done. But for the longest time, you could pretty much sum up any private sector organization's primary strategic objective, no matter what it actually did, as it exists to create value for shareholders. That's it. Now, the definition of what that means has gotten more complex. Corporate social responsibility came along, first of all, so it wasn't just about profit. But that basic thread for a long time was, what is your profit margin? And you can trace every individual's contribution quite easily to the corporate strategy using that one metric. Public sector's never been that straightforward because you haven't had a concept of a profit margin. So I guess the question is kind of more like, what's your outcomes margin? What is the ratio of the resources that you're putting into something versus the outcomes that you're getting for your service users? But of course, that is rendered incredibly complicated by your local geographic and demographic data. You've got to know what people's incomes, the population health is, their life chances, the levels of employment in the area, all sorts of things that you can't control that contribute to the outcomes beyond what resources you have to put into it. But I wonder, Heather, from your point of view, can you see organizations starting to think more in terms of that complexity and plurality, about it's not so straightforward what your organization's purpose and goal is anymore?
I suppose so. I mean, certainly, yeah, moving away from just a single view of value for shareholders. I think that's been happening for quite a while now. And I think there is more of a movement towards purpose. So what is your contribution to whether it's wider society or planet or something? As an organization, I do think that is shifting. I do think one of the struggles sometimes is just, there are certain things that are easier to measure, and so they get measured. Even things like looking at change management, we measure certain things around change, and I think collectively we've got a lot better at measuring some of these more people-centric things, but they are still a very crude instrument a lot of the time. So I do think that is an inherent barrier. But I do think it is shifting. I think people are realizing more and more that to succeed as an organization, you need employees to be engaged, and people aren't generally motivated and engaged by, we just need to make a lot of money. I think that message has landed, so it's people trying to navigate their way through that now. That's my sense of it.
Sean, any views? Yeah, I think the days of, and I'm going to use the term lip service. So a lot of organisation played lip service to the needs of the employees. It's gone. You're going to get found out, so you've got to start delivering on. You've either got to start delivering, or you've got to be prepared for the fact that you are not going to be able to hire the best people that you want to, and you're going to lose people very quickly. I think, yeah, it's about reality now. Do what you may have been pretending to do, and do it better than you do in the beginning.
Someone's made a point in the chat, actually, in the comments, that pick whatever your motivation is for wanting to do that, but it's no longer purely about altruism. There's a real competitive advantage there that you will miss out on by not taking that seriously.
Yeah.
We've started to look with some behavioural science around how do we attract the right people.
I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear you, Mark.
I'm struggling a bit.
Is that better?
Yeah, come on, adjust yourself.
Sorry, that's my microphone. So we've started to look at how we shift from attracting people in terms of going to market to drawing people to us through our reputation, which is why employee voice is so important, because it's no longer about what we say and what we offer. It's actually quite a crowded market in terms of benefits. It's now about what's unique about us. How can you affiliate to us? And we also want to drive out those people who have a certain perception about public sector. But behavioural scientists have been fascinating in terms of the reputation that we have at the moment is not good. And there is a cost to that for the organisation. It's not just that we aren't attracting necessarily a great field, because I've doubled the size of my team during the pandemic, and we've got some fantastic talent, not because they're HR professionals, but because they've got the right attitude. But as we go forward, there is a cost to not doing it, because it will become harder to recruit. You will have to do more campaigning. You will have to up your offer. And people aren't going for that now. They are going for that experience. They're going to see what's in it for me, but also socially, what can I affiliate to that is acceptable to my value base. And that employee voice helps you touch base all the time about, are we getting it right? And I always refer to the moment of the conversation in the pub, which I know in the UK you still haven't got, but our pubs are open. And that conversation in the pub is, what do people say about you? Because they will be honest. And if they can't have that honest conversation with you, you're going to have a real disconnect in your talent strategy, because it's a competitive market out there. Other organizations are offering what millennials want now, particularly local authorities in the UK, and it just is too big, too structured, and we are going to have to move much more quickly.
We are coming up to the end of our time, the end of our hour and a half. So what I will do is kind of just ask each of you if you've got any thoughts to finish off with. This is the Jerry Springer thought for the day moment. So any thoughts that you've got, summarizing what we've talked about, or maybe just given all that we've just discussed, your view on the top thing that either you're thinking about or that you think others should give some thought to when thinking about what the future of work might look like. Sean, let me come to you first.
For me, the most important thing is really listen to what your employees and your customers are saying. It's the most important thing. Don't just listen, though. You have to 100% react to what they're saying. It may not be exactly what you're being told, and it could be near as damn it. There's a compromise there. But listening, and I've found it so beneficial. At ePut, we can feel a big culture shift because we're doing and we're engaging early doors on everything. And I'm just going to talk very quickly, Jonathan. It's something that I know works. We run the grill. So there is absolutely no reason for any employee in our organization to be scared to talk to even the chief exec. So we open the floor and any question can be asked and they get an honest answer. That's how far you need to go. There is no separation between the people right at the top of the tree, including our chairman and our non-exec directors. Any of us will answer any question of any employee at any time. We've got to break down all the boundaries, barriers, if we want to succeed.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sean. Mark.
So I think that the thought for me is that we are coming out of a pandemic, and a lot of our conversation is framed around our experience perhaps over the past 12 months, although there were some emerging trends. But we've got to be careful not to be caught out by the future. So we are talking about the workplace of the future, the work of the future. There are a number of disruptors coming down the line. So in order to deal with those, you first of all, as Sean has said, need to listen and work with your colleagues, because you are going to be problem solving like no other time before. But the second thing for me is be clear about what those disruptors are, because if they come along and you're not expecting them and you're not prepared for them, they will disrupt negatively. But there are opportunities to come as well. So those relationships that you form now will form your ability to address those disruptors in the future. Great,
thanks, Mark. And Heather.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much we could have covered and didn't have time to cover. You could do this for a whole day, I think, if not more. But I suppose key things for me is thinking about how we as sort of whole humans can thrive at work, which is a much bigger picture than we've historically been thinking about it. Yes, we need to look at psychology, what the trends are, what the data says, but we also need to listen, exactly as has just been said, because there is that real variation from person to person and over time as well. What someone needs one year is going to be different to the next year. Life changes, as we now know, very strongly. So I think the key thing is about learning as we go, trying things, but also having that kind of learning mindset. If I was a CEO of a much larger organization than the one I am at the moment, I think I might feel under quite a lot of pressure to get this right, and actually thinking learning mindset, to have a conversation. I won't know all the answers. Let's see what we can do together, take collective responsibility, keep talking. So some of those human skills really come into the fore, I think.
Cool. And just remind people the name of your company and how people can get in touch with you if they want to.
Yeah, sure. It's Mind & Co, Mind & Co. And you can find my website at www.mindandco.co.uk.
Perfect. Thanks. That's all. Thanks to everyone. Thank you so much to my fellow panelists for that discussion. I hope it's felt to audience members that it's gone as quickly as it has done for us. Thanks to Claire Rawlings for the movement break, and thank you to all of you for joining. If you're interested to find out more information about Claire or Heather's organizations, we'll post some information afterwards. If you're interested in moving to Jersey, have a conversation with Mark. And if you're interested in moving to Essex or Barcelona, have a conversation with Sean. If anything that I've talked about, unlikely as it might sound, is of interest to you, you can find out more about Human Engine and the work we do via our LinkedIn page or human-engine.co.uk. Do reach out to us if anything that we've said is of interest, and particularly if you're interested in learning more about employee-led change, if that's of interest to you in your organization and how that might help you to move forwards. Otherwise, thank you so much all for being here for the last hour and a half, and I hope you have a wonderful Wednesday afternoon, wherever you are.